Okay, yeah, so as a reminder, this is being recorded, and I think we can get started. The first order of business, can anyone scribe?
I'll give it a try.
Okay, thank you, Nick. There's a minute doc link from the agenda that you can be able to access. The next one, since we've been lately drifting a little bit in terms of the time slot for the meeting, so I put together a doodles survey thing. If you could all just reply on that with the time slots that you don't have regular conflicts with, and then we'd be able to figure out basically what's the time slot that's most convenient for everyone, hopefully one that everyone can regularly attend so that we avoid missing people due to shifting schedules. Also on that front, I will be out of office for the next 3 weeks, starting from next week. So I think that the next call after this one will be next year, unless you all want to meet up without me. But okay, and since I just saw that Philippe joined us, hey Philippe.
Yes.
There are a couple of review requests that Xiaoshen sent out a few days ago to the ping.
Yes.
That I had questions from ping folks, from folks that are on the ping, basically asking me what this is about and what they should review there. So is that just a regular review that should we provide them a diff from between the current state of the spec and I don't know, the L1 version? What are we asking them to review, basically?
I think we're asking them to review any substantive change since the last time we asked them to review first, and I'm closing my door, and a simple lift might do it, or pointing them, this is a list of issues that you guys need to pay attention to, and because that's another way to do it as well. So whatever the shortest path to say, this is the changes that we would want to draw your particular attention to.
Okay, so do I understand correctly that someone on our end needs to compile a list of those changes and send it their way, or is that work on them, or what's the?
I think it would help them if we are going to compile the list. The question is how much work do we need to do to compile that list? And I don't have a list of the changes in front of me right now.
Don't we already have that in the header of the document, highlighting the big changes? Each of the documents has a section saying what is the big diff from L1.
Then I think this is the thing that we want to highlight to you guys, and that should be good enough.
Yep. That's what I assumed going in.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and if they tell us this is not good enough, they should tell us why.
Yeah,
Xiao can also tell me that one of the co-chair provided other comment as well that I'm going to figure out what to do with.
Okay. Okay. So with that, I think we can move on to actual exciting things and talk a little bit about LCP. Annie?
Hi, everybody. I haven't been at this meeting before. I'm Annie. I've been helping Nicholas out with some data analysis for largest contentful paint, and I wanted to present what I've got so far. Sorry. So I've got a presentation. I've got everything I've got so far in a GitHub repo, which should be in the meeting agenda. It doesn't have everything that was requested. So as far as I understand, we asked for like some examples of why we think it's a good idea to remove, to invalidate body background images, some examples of why we wanted to invalidate elements removed from the DOM, how well it correlates with other performance metrics, and also some data about business metrics. So we have the body background images data and the correlation data so far. For splash images, which is the reason that we invalidate images that are removed from the DOM, I actually couldn't find great data, so I'm going to do a deeper analysis of the top 10,000 sites what the diffs are and bring that back in January. So I'll start with the body background images. So basically, we remove body background images like as a candidate for largest contentful paint, and we wanted to kind of show why do we do that. So I basically took like the Quantcast top 800 and just ran a Puppeteer script to find like the first ones I could with body background images, and then just compared before and after. So here's the first one I found. This is a background image here. It's like a flag on top of a black background, so it's pretty hard to see. So when we invalidate it, this is the largest contentful paint. It's very hard to see it. I think if I click on this, you might be able to see the little star and the flag there. But if we don't invalidate that background image to the user, it pretty much looks like the same thing. It's not really important to the main content. So that's an example of the body background loading after the main content. The next site that came up in the top list was dailyvoice.com. It has this background image here, which is like, it's huge. And depending on the connection, it can load before or after the content. So when it loads quickly, we get the LCP here, where we actually don't have the content on the site. And if we invalidate it, we get this like your town, your news is the LCP. So we think that that's better, showing kind of more representative of the main content. When it's loading slowly, if we don't invalidate, it's going to be the largest image. So when it's loading slowly, we call this the largest contentful paint. And that's because the actual content is there. If we don't invalidate, we use a background image and this whole thing is painted. And although that looks more visually complete, it's not really content. It's more of a background. So we still think that's better. And a similar case for the third site that came up was coolmathgames.com. It has this, I clipped this as like a super, super long image. And it generally shows up pretty quickly. So if we don't invalidate it, this is what we get for the largest contentful paint. Just basically the background and some of the images starting. And if we do invalidate it, we get much more of the main content showing. So those are some examples of why we think it's important to invalidate the body background image. I tried to do this exact same test with splash screens, and I didn't get as clear results. So I'm going to do a much deeper test and bring back data in January. The other thing that was asked for was some correlations between, like how does it compare to other performance metrics? So we used the HTTP archive data set to do this. So I have data from mobile and desktop. We both wanted to see like how well does it correlate to speed index to see if it could be a good replacement for speed index, which is a great lab metric, but not available for real user monitoring. And also, does it overlap too much with existing metrics? So here's the mobile data set. It correlates really well with speed index, both on mobile and desktop. It's 0.86 or 0.87 on desktop. But basically you have this like nice line of speed index and largest contentful paint, which is exactly what we wanted to see. When we look at, there's some concerns that it might overlap with other metrics, especially first contentful paint. And we do see that on a lot of sites, like the first contentful paint is also the largest contentful paint. But then we see this like big circle here that shows like sometimes like for many sites, it's not very correlated at all, and it's a very different metric. And we see the exact same thing for first paint. If we look at 99% visual complete, we see almost the opposite. Like usually first contentful paint happens before visual complete, but it's not really correlated when. There are, animations and things that could pop into the DOM to make it happen after visual complete sometimes. I checked DOM interactive. Sorry, this is so slow. And again, DOM interactive is just when did the DOM load, and that's really not the same thing as when did the content display on modern sites. So again, you see it's not as correlated. And for onload, we see kind of something similar to visually complete, where usually it's before onload, but when before is really varied. And I can present the desktop data, but it's in the notes, and it looks almost exactly the same. So those are the two pieces of data that I had. Did people have questions or concerns?
In particular, I think that in previous conversations, Ben and Jill had reservations or concerns.
No, it's, so I basically asked for this, so it's great that it happened. Thank you for doing that work. I think the fact that it correlates to speed index is especially interesting because, to my knowledge, this is pretty much the first time we can bridge the gap between RUM and synthetic for this. So it makes it sound very worthwhile to me.
Great, glad to hear that.
Yeah, agreed. I think this is really great. Thanks, Annie.
Of course. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, cool. And yeah, I should probably also, Annie did a presentation like a couple of weeks ago at performance.now in Amsterdam about this whole, like, a more detailed, I don't know if like, basically the whole journey that this metric took as well as others. So I will send it to the list so that people can view that in their own leisure. Okay. And so in that case, let's move on to talk a little bit about some issues. So we have a couple of issues from navigation timing that we talked about or related to discussions that we had at TPAC. The first one is navigation timing 118. Add a new entry type for navigations from BF cache. Philip, do you want to talk about that, or should I? I think I saw Philip on the call.
Yeah, I can. I'm just catching up on this, but I think the issue is that we wanted to avoid updating existing timing data that developers might have assigned to local variables or things like that that could break potentially if we change the existing data on the page and then instead potentially create a new navigation timing entry type or something that we're dispatching something new rather than updating existing things in the entry. The timeline.
Yeah. So you actually run tests, and some browsers currently update the entries that are already dispatched. Yeah, and that's
if I remember. I think maybe somebody from Mozilla can clarify, but I think the navigation.type value will change when the page comes out of BF cache. And then not in an entry, but in the old performance.timing API, Safari will update the timestamps of those values when the page comes out of BF cache.
Yeah. So like, and generally, I think on the subject of BF cache, there is currently like a lot of focus on the implementation. And like traditionally, this like the BF cache has been mostly a Firefox thing that wasn't implemented in Chrome, and I'm not sure about Safari. And now I think there's implementation happening on both those fronts. Is that, like, Alex, is that a correct statement from the Safari side of things, or if you can?
Safari's had it for quite a while.
Okay. So it's just, so Chrome is catching up, and yeah, and it would be good to clarify. Yeah, clarify what browsers should and shouldn't do in that case. I guess the main question that I have is, do we want to add a new, like the title here is add a new entry type. So is that like, do we want to add a new entry type, or do we just want to add another entry to the navigation timing buffer saying here's the BF cache entry, like leave the initial entry alone and just for a performance timeline, have a new entry that includes the BF cache timings, like the BF cache fetch document timings.
So the problem of adding the same type is that it might break existing users if they just look at the last entry from the performance timeline, and if they are not aware that we queue new BF cache entries, then they're just going to assume that that's the navigation entry, the original one, since right now we only issue one. So that's a bit of a problem.
I would naively expect most people to just take the first one and not the last one, because it's easier to write 0 than
Sure.
but yeah, maybe we can try to estimate if people are currently, like, how many people will be confused. I don't know if breakage is the right term, but we could try to estimate how many people will get confused by adding a new entry to that, you know, buffer that was previously assumed to only have one single entry.
Related, or actually maybe slightly different questions. First of all, my intuition is the same. Most of the code I've looked at just looks at 0 index of that array. So for those that are using resource or navigation timing L2, I think that's what I would expect. But we do have different implementations right now, signaling different things, right? So I'm curious as to what amount of confusion that's causing today, if any, because clearly we're doing something. For example, in Safari, Firefox, we're just doing different things. So are any run providers actually harvesting that and meaningfully interpreting it, or are they just ignoring it?
I think they're ignoring it right now.
Yeah, we're not doing anything with it right now at all.
Okay. And Nick, for example, from your perspective, would it be better to have a different entry, or should we just update the existing entry as current implementations are doing?
I think it'd be better to have a separate entry. And for what it's worth, we always take the 0th entry when we try to get it out of the timeline today.
Mm-hmm.
It just feels like you're losing less data if you have a second entry, and I don't know if you would ever want to compare between entry 0 and 1 for any reason.
That's a good
But
question, actually. What if it is a new entry, would it have all the same fields? The answer is probably not, right?
Well, but your question was a new entry, not new entry type. So that's a different question.
Oh, fair, yeah. So I guess if it's a new entry, you would have, would it have a bunch of fields as zeroed out?
Right. And what would we have if it was a new entry type? I mean, what actual fields would be useful in that kind of navigation? I'm not sure.
What is Safari currently updating? Like,
That's a good question.
It's in the description, Philip. So currently Safari will update the value of performance.timing, so that's nav timing 1. And Firefox changes the type.
So those have a bunch of attributes, right?
Right. So what exactly is being updated?
Reset navigation timing upon yeah, so there's a comment from Ryosuke pointing to okay. Oh yeah, we can actually look at that patch to try
So
to
it resets document load timing struct and record navigation start. So I think it resets navigation start, if I'm reading this correctly.
Over the years, like, you know, my one guy who was basically done.
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
yeah, it resets all the timings and updates navigation start to the current time.
Over the years, like, there's a lot
so
there are a lot more roles, but a lot of different.
How would that also impact the time origin in terms of like, do we want
local CPM?
we want to keep the original time origin, right?
I'll be able to share a segment of that.
Or
for all the teams in Waterloo, here are all the teams that have CPM.
Yeah, I definitely think we want to keep the original time origin. I think it's very likely that somebody will have stored that in a separate variable, and then those will be different if we update the time origin.
Yeah.
Manager and Mountain View who reports to the engineer.
Quick question: is there anybody that's like gathering this data intentionally with the intent of optimizing their website for making it faster to pull out of the BF cache? Or anybody that cares how long it takes to pull out of the BF cache?
I would assume it's the other way around, and people would want to exclude BF cache navigations from, biasing their.
Right, but in that case, we would just not update anything when BF cache happens. And like the question is whether it's useful to have this new additional data.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
I think there was a request at Google from a bunch of internal teams, including search, because Chrome was starting to implement BF cache. They wanted to understand how it would affect performance and how much maybe it would improve performance. I think that's where the original request came from.
One place where it could be meaningful is if people play around with removing the unload event. That can have an impact on them being inside or outside of the BF cache, and then they can compare history navigations to BF cache navigations and see the benefits that are hopefully there.
Yeah, I'll be honest, like out of all the vendors and customers I've ever talked to, like nobody is even asking anything about these kind of navigations at all. But from my experience.
Yeah, I don't think this is a web developer thing. I think this is for browser implementers.
I think lots of web developers don't know it happens as well.
Yeah, I don't see how they can optimize specifically for this case.
Yeah.
So the web developers can optimize for, not breaking the BF cache.
Let me know when everybody knows that I won't bring it up.
Okay.
Not for anybody until you told me that.
And that basically, when they do that, they can compare their like BF cache entries versus history entries and see the impact of that. Like, again, it's not something we are loud requests for, but
Naive question. Are there other signals to detect that the page is coming out of BF cache? Or the page may have come out of BF cache?
Yeah, right now the page show event will have the event.persisted property true if it comes out of the BF cache. And we also had a discussion about potentially the event.timestamp value of that event could signal when the browser tried to take it out of the BF cache, and then you could call performance.now in that event. And the delta between those would let you know how long it took to come out of the BF cache.
So if that sounds sensible, and if that exists, does not address the use case. So if I'm search and I want to ensure that BF cache is working, I could monitor that, I could log that. Is that fair?
The thing is, the event timestamp would need to be implemented this way in all of the browsers, so that they have a consistent way to monitor that across browsers. And I'm not sure if that timestamp is specified to be that way. That's the problem.
Right, it's definitely not specified to be that way.
So even there are two distinct use cases, right? One is knowing that a page came out of BF cache. So if you want to leverage that capability in the browser, make sure you're not accidentally killing it by having an unload handler, that is already answered by existing event. There's a separate question around how long did it take, which is kind of like an interesting curiosity. And that seems like a different thing we could explore.
yeah, and that's more of a, yeah, the main point there is to compare it to the non-BF cache history navigation case. Because there's no way for developers to optimize that. It's just like the best baseline.
Sure. Right. So then bringing it back to our discussion, do we actually need to surface anything for navigation timing? It seems like it's a solved problem. Or a partially solved problem.
Yeah.
Right. But if the answer is no, though, we still need to align behavior in the sense that we shouldn't be updating the existing entries when a BF navigation occurs.
I see. Okay. Yeah. So we have different implementations currently. So we just want to agree on what that could be. And the one answer could be just don't. How do folks?
It's also the case that Firefox will. I think Boris asked this question in a different issue, but the spec will talk about back-forward navigations, and I think he was asking if BF cache navigations count the same way. And it sounds like we're saying that we don't want to count BF cache navigations as separate back-forward navigations.
Yeah, they should not be counted as anything performance timeline, like related to performance timeline. So other than if they are then triggering resources like resource loads or long tasks or whatnot, that should be accumulated as it typically would, but we wouldn't have a separate navigation timing entry for that.
Yeah, one problem there is that it would be hard for them to, well, I guess if they use the event.persisted, then that makes sense. But in general, those new entries after the BF navigation will have timestamps that are pretty inflated, right?
So
because the time origin is with respect to
the original,
But I guess as long as they don't compute any delta from before BF navigation with after BF navigation, then it should be okay.
Yeah, and anyway, we said that we want to keep the original time origin because otherwise it's just a mess. Right?
Right, but then that means the times will be large.
Yes, but developer can detect the fact that the page was unloaded and then reloaded from BF cache.
Right.
So that seems. Yeah, I can buy the fact that like it seems like a niche need that can be addressed by current like the persistent flag, and I didn't catch what other event.
Page show event.
Oh, the page show event. Yeah, true. Yeah.
Timestamp.
Yeah.
But it's not specified.
Not specified in terms of it can run in different time, like it's async and can run at different times. What's not specified there? Like that.
I think what most browsers do now is they just set event.timestamp to the value whenever the event handler runs. And I guess we're proposing that we would update it to specify that the event.timestamp would be set to the timestamp when the user clicked the back button or the forward button.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's reasonable, but not really a discussion for this group, or I don't know who owns the page show event.
Isn't that part of page visibility?
Oh,
no, it's separate.
It's separate. Okay.
I think it's an HTML spec.
Okay, good luck then.
Okay, so does that sound like, so yeah, so I guess that in any case we need to align behavior and make progress on something, like on some changes.
So if I may try to summarize, I think what I heard and what we're saying is there is a use case, but it is met by page show. We're not hearing strong demand from any of the existing users for this signal. So we're proposing that like we can just write it up in that issue that we will resolve it with basically no action. But we suggest that the other browsers, I guess actually no, that's not no action. We suggest that Safari and Firefox, I guess, change their implementation to not signal this, just to be consistent.
Yes, and we can also suggest that the page show event will better align with the, in the back forward case, better align with the user action in terms of what the event timestamp would be.
Alex, Ben, does that sound somewhat reasonable to you guys?
Yeah, I don't have strong feelings about this, so yeah.
We can put it out there and see if someone shows up out of the woodwork and tells us that, like, no, I absolutely need this, and then we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, this seems reasonable. Let's just throw it out there, and if there's an objection we haven't heard of, then we'll know then.
All right, sounds good.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, the only additional thing I could think of is, which would involve a new feature anyway, but detecting things like first paint after it comes out of BF cache, or I don't know, largest contentful paint after it comes out of BF cache. But I think that could be better solved by new APIs in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that also seems like mostly, like, again, this is not necessarily something the developers can optimize for, but browser.
Yeah, because if it's really cached, there's nothing the developer can do, right? To increase the speed at which their content gets re-rendered.
Yeah, you're basically measuring how long it takes us to deserialize the serialized document and throw it at the...
Right, I completely agree. I don't think it's a strong developer use case.
Yeah, so in that case, browsers already have other means to collect statistics and understand if their deserialization is slow or fast or not.
Mhm.
Ben, you were saying something?
No, I was just going to say, you said earlier about page so persistent, indicating to developers if this is coming out of the cache. I think that's sufficient.
Okay. Cool. So shall we move on? The other issue that I don't know, like navigation timing, but I don't know if there's a ton to discuss there. 116. Can hitting enter on the address bar to the same URL be considered a reload? And Nicholas,
Yeah, so yeah, we had someone report a bug because they have strong feelings about how the navigation timing should behave when they load a website by using the URL address bar. So currently well, it's basically cached, so we consider it to be a reload, and therefore the entry exposed is just of that type. But people in the bug, which is linked to the GitHub issue, were saying that that is not correct because it's a navigation on the URL address bar. But honestly, I'm not sure I understood the use cases, so I just wanted to surface this for discussion. Yeah.
So I think, like right now, reload in navigation timing is defined as navigation through the reload operation or the location.reload method, where location.reload is actually defined, and I'm not sure a reload operation is. I think we went down that rabbit hole during TPAC to try to figure out if there are existing HTML hooks we can use on that front for figuring out what a reload operation is. And then it seems like something that should be defined somewhere in HTML, where we just inherent that logic. And yeah, and on top of that, I'm not sure like the specific UI actions that users take may differ in different browsers, and some browsers may do different things on those kind of non-reload reloads.
So I'm scanning through the HTML spec. There's no direct hit for reload operations, so that's a bit of a miss, I guess, or a gap in the spec. Question: do different browsers have special behavior if you hit reload on, or if you hit enter on the same URL?
This is a bit of a mess in Firefox, frankly. We have like shift reload doing different things inside the browser too. Honestly, so I would love to see clarification on this, frankly.
I do think we also have a lot of different behaviors depending on how the reload occurs, which is weird.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mess for us, frankly.
Yeah, I think it is in Chrome as well, actually. So
yeah, so there is a flag for reload triggered navigation in HTML. It is, if I remember correctly, defined in location, and then hand waved below that. Yeah, when a user requests that the active document in browsing context be reloaded through a user interface element, the user agent should navigate blah, 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 and this is a reload triggered navigation. So
Well, but then
and wait,
it's unclear.
that I think that we need to like if this needs to be specified, it needs to be specified in HTML.
Right, because it's unclear what a user-triggered reload can be in that context. Hitting enter in the URL address bar, if it happens to be the same URL you're looking at the moment, I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
I have a slight opinion here because we, like Firefox, also have different behaviors for reload versus shift reload versus just hitting the URL and pushing enter. And hitting the URL and pushing enter is clearly a new navigation in our implementation. I think that it should be viewed as incorrect to say, oh, the URL is the same, so we're just going to treat it as a reload. But I can't give you all the details why, because I don't know them, and I don't have too strong of a feeling about this.
I would say, like, basically, I think like this may be true, but I think it's an HTML discussion where HTML should elaborate on. I'll just post the link to the minutes, but there's like the reload trigger navigation. What's a UI element there? Like, it seems like HTML should be able to define that. And
I think there may be two distinct things. One is there is a gap in HTML spec, like shift reload and all these things, and none of that is defined. So it seems like we should open a discussion on HTML spec around that. The click in URL bar, hit enter. It's funny because it's actually one of my pet peeves. Whenever I see people do that, I'm just like, hit the reload button, damn it. So I like it. I think I've observed, just because it's a pet peeve of mine, that people use it as a reload. So I think it's kind of just a judgment call that we need to make.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I would love to, I know this is a bit of a digression, but I would like to just probe what Apple's shift reload thing is. Like, that's one of the things we're investigating now, is if we can clean this up. And but I do think that we're going to have to change kind of some documentation or user expectations about what this does. I think this is an area that's ripe for cleanup, frankly.
I don't disagree. I just think that cleanup should be done in HTML, and then navigation timing is just like should fall out of that.
Okay.
So are we saying in the meantime, each browser will continue with their behavior while we wait for HTML to define everything for us, or?
I think the action item here that I can take on is to open an HTML issue on that front, and then we can discuss it there. And in the meantime, navigation timing should just use the same flag that HTML does, and use the reload, like is reload navigation flag from HTML, and whatever is defined there should.
Yep. And for sake of completeness, I think I heard that there's the reload button, there's the URL enter use case, there's shift reload. Are there others that we should?
There's Control R, Control 5.
Yeah.
Shift.
There's function keys on Windows. Yeah.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, there's Control R, there's Control Shift R.
Yeah.
That clears the cache.
I don't think it clears the cache. It just sends out pragma no cache for the sub resources.
Sure.
Yeah.
There's also a location.reload.
Oh, right. Yes. That one is actually spec'd in HTML.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was the best defined. The ones that require user actions are not really defined.
Right.
Yeah, and I don't think there's the concept of a force reload in the HTML spec, or at least I haven't run into that. And what that does and how it, like, so yeah, I agree with Ben that there's a lot of place for cleanups there. I just think that it's probably a wider scope cleanup.
Yep. Let's open an issue in HTML spec, and we can just put a blocker tag on this one because we can't make progress until then.
Yeah, a lot of the UX stuff changed with mobile web on this. I think it was ill-defined on desktop, and then moving to mobile only further muddied it. So I would really like to see HTML cleaned up here.
Yeah.
Is there force reload on mobile?
That's a good question. I don't know.
I've certainly tapped the URL bar and hit enter to cite my own peeve. I've also done the pull down, right? I guess that would be the refresh, but there's
There's a UI thing for reload. Like you can click the menu and then reload, but there's no shift.
Right.
Yeah, I think there might be like 2-finger drag down. I don't know, something like that.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I mean, just saying. Like the drag down on mobile really also threw a kink in it.
Yeah.
Right. No, that's a good point.
Okay. Cool. Shall we move on to page visibility? Next issue we had was lack of clarity on how occlusion interacts with iframes. This is an issue opened a few weeks ago following the changes that I think Todd landed around that time, or I don't know, a couple of months ago. So page visibility issue 56. And basically, I think that there's the specific question here that needs someone to think it through, and I think there's a meta question of who will own page visibility now that Todd has drifted away to other interests. Do we have I don't know, someone on the call that cares deeply about page visibility and would like to see it being worked on and would like to volunteer to potentially edit?
I mean, we certainly use page visibility for information on our run metrics, but it kind of just works for us today. So I'm not sure that like we have a lot of concern about it continuing to be updated, but could certainly give it a try if we need somebody to own it.
I'll say, coming from Google Ads, like for iframes, I don't think there's any like gap in spec. We never consider occlusion like as part of the page visibility API. Although we have occlusion, we have other APIs for occlusion detection.
Yeah, so I agree that in terms of the use case of occlusion detection for iframes, I think that intersection observer and intersection observer v2 covers that.
Right. So like for us, I think for us, page visibility just means like, is the time foregrounded? I don't think it really means, at least when we think of it, we don't really think about it in terms of, is the iframe present? I'm just reading through the issue right now.
Yeah.
So perhaps, yeah, like what does the current implementers do with iframes at the moment? Does it inherit from the parent or?
yeah, we should definitely have tests for that I don't think we do. And so at least for Chrome, I don't know off the top of my head what it does. Do other vendors know off the top of their head of like how occlusion works, or is that
No.
yeah,
So
okay.
perhaps the first step would be to add a test and see what happens.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable. So yeah, adding a test as the first step, and I think that we can, like, at least where I would be going with this is to make sure that this is not, like, basically I don't want to expose iframe occlusion.
Right, so it will inherit from the parent.
Yes, so iframes should inherit from the parent, and then intersection observer v2 should be good enough for in-page occlusion. I don't know if we want to go down the path of, like, I out of page occlusion. Like, another app is partially blocking the page and blocking one iframe but not the other. Sounds like something very scary to expose, unless there is a very good reason, and I don't know of that very good reason.
Yeah. So inheriting from the parent seems to be the correct choice and also simpler to implement. So
And yeah,
hopefully that's what's being implemented right now.
yeah. Which is, yeah, if it's simpler, there's like, we can, like, it would be a good guess to, you know, to estimate that this is what we'll have, but we need tests to actually know that for sure. Alex, Ben, does that sound reasonable?
Yes, I don't think you want to get into partial page visibility.
Yeah, I don't have some feelings about this.
Okay, cool. So we can conclude that I guess, like, on the testing front, I don't know that we have the infrastructure to test occlusion, though, in WPT. So that is another barrier where, like, we could have manual tests. And yeah, for that, and then file WPT infrastructure issues for occlusion testing through WebDriver or whatnot.
I mean, is there a way to hide the test page currently? Or how are these tests working?
That's exactly, like, yeah, maybe they're like, I don't know, we'll have to ask the testing folks and see if there's a WebDriver API that enables you to background the tab or something along those lines. But that is also something different from, there's another app that's blocking that window, which is what these occlusion testings are about. As far as
Could you use, this is very naive, but could you use WebDriver to make another browser window occlude this browser window?
Open window and then move it. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe that would work, yeah.
That could work. Yeah. Yeah, so I guess Does anyone want to sign up for writing those tests? Going once. Oh. Yeah. So
We should start doing raffles, and the winner gets to write some tests.
yeah, that would be a good solution for that. Yeah, okay, so I guess we leave it unassigned at the moment. I think we can add a needs test label.
Yeah, I would also ask someone to summarize the outcome of this discussion on that thread and just see if that, because it was actually a really good report with good questions. So we should talk about what we concluded and see if that resonates with them.
Yeah, I can take an action item to summarize that on the thread. Okay, and with that, we have 2 minutes left, so it's probably not enough time to dive into long tasks and event loops. So we'll push that back to next time around. So thanks all, and I will see you next year, if not before.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks, folks. Bye.